We will never, under my leadership, go into an election with a manifesto that is not a serious plan for government.
He came to bury Corbyn, not to praise him. Tonight, can Keir Starmer put enough of Labour's past behind him to win back the voters who left?
This is a... At this time on a Wednesday, it's normally the Tories that are heckling me. Doesn't bother me then. Won't bother me now.
Hecklers in the hall perhaps made his point for him. Keir Starmer told his audience to choose between shouting slogans and changing lives. He wants to talk to the country. Is it listening? Also tonight. Now, the fuel crisis is threatening stock lines in the run-up to Christmas, and the army gears up to get on the road. We ask what the knock-on effect is for other industries. And in our latest look at life over 50 degrees, we're in Mexico, seeing how extreme heat is changing the country.
Tenía mucho calor, pequeña. Tanto figura pública como nosotros no hubiéramos llegado, esa persona probablemente haya fallecido.
Hello, good evening. There were 3 Labour leaders on stage this afternoon. The ghost of Jeremy Corbyn, now firmly interred by a man now turning his back on his left flank. The ghost of Tony Blair, who was perhaps, after decades, being rehabilitated as a template for good governance. And the corporeal body of Keir Starmer, who stood before his party in person for the first time since becoming leader and asked them to believe it was back in business. It was a speech from and for the centre ground. What it lacked in fizz, it made up for in length, but it allowed him to handle his hecklers with a few careful lines and the quiet resignation of a man trying to show the country what his day job can be like. He offered big thoughts on crime, rape convictions and the green economy, and familiar syntax on education and mental health. And he compared his seriousness of mission with what he called the trivial Boris Johnson. This needed to be a moment for Keir Starmer, a man who hasn't really made his mark on the public imagination thus far. And tonight we'll be asking if he got there. We begin with our political editor, Nick Watt.
Hardly a stampede, but taking their seats. Not quite for an appointment with history, but certainly for a decisive moment.
Thank you so much, conference.
Is this the leader who can take Labour from a decade of opposition to a path heading towards government?
It will not take another election defeat for the Labour Party to become an alternative government in which you can trust.
A big step taken in that direction this week, in Keir Starmer's mind, by cutting the Labour left down to size. And today, the left roared back with heckling, even after Keir Starmer had spoken of his admiration of the NHS after nurses treated his gravely ill mother.
Let this conference ring out its approval to the NHS staff, truly the very best of us. Shouting slogans or changing lives, conference.
A riposte which set the scene for the themes of the day, personal stories to illustrate political values which will, he believes, chime with voters. Blair, but not the full Blair, according to one aide, as Starmer canted through touchstone issues for Labour's longest-serving Prime Minister.
Under my leadership, the fight against crime will always be a Labour issue. Education is so important. I'm tempted to say it 3 times. In this conference hall, we are patriots. In a way, the more we expose the inadequacy of this government, the more it presses the question back on us. If they're so bad, what does it say about us? Because after all, in 2019, We lost to them, and we lost badly. I know that hurts each and every one of you.
A warm, if not exactly rapturous reception. But high praise from his not wholly loyal deputy.
Say that you and Keir Starmer are the yin and yang of the Labour Party.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's pretty obvious that me and Keir have different styles. You know, some people describe us like Tony Blair and John Prescott. You know, I'm Prescott in the skirt, and I don't mind that. You know, but I am bombastic. I am a bit more sort of. I say I. Thank you. And I've got great shoes. And, you know, the thing is that, you know, I overshare and sometimes Keir undershares. I think Keir shared a lot today, and I think he'll gain a huge amount of respect from the public, from the voters for doing that, and from within our party. I certainly think he's done a good job.
The two of you have obviously had a bit of a bumpy ride in recent weeks. Are you back on track? Are you good friends again?
Do you know what? We don't have a bumpy ride, but I say it how I see it. That's how I am. You know, I can't help that. Keir knows that. He says, oh, that's Ange. He knows my style now, and more importantly, I know his. And it's like bringing the band together, you know. That's how we kind of formed, because the membership chose us, and we've both been true to the way we are. You know, Keir can't be me, and I can't be Keir, because we're very different, but we both share the same values, and we both have one aim, and that's to deliver for the people of this country by being in government.
And Laura Peacock, what?
The left was dejected.
People are aggrieved that members have been treated in this way. The conference has been very introspective. They were hoping for an olive branch, for there to be reaching out to the broad coalition in the party.
Nearly a quarter of a century ago, a young and newly elected Labour Prime Minister took to the stage here in Brighton in equally bright sunshine. That was the start of a decade of progress, Tony Blair's allies say, a decade of sellout, his Labour critics say. And that legacy has haunted this party ever since. But now Keir Starmer has decided that perhaps the only Labour leader to win a viable majority in the last 55 years can provide some, though not all, the clues on how to forge a path back to power.
Low expectations on a crucial day for a leader needing to exceed expectations. Autumnal life carrying on, but Keir Starmer leaves the seaside with his position significantly strengthened, though at the price of an energised and angry left flank.
That was Nick Watts, and we'll be talking to the Shadow Foreign Secretary in a second. But first, Nick, I don't know if you'd call it reaction to the speech or a separate bit of news, but something coming out from the government itself tomorrow.
Yeah, so the government moving quickly in an area where they could be politically vulnerable. So tomorrow, Rishi Sunak will be announcing a new set of grants to help poorer households through the winter. Now, the government will say this is long planned. The furlough scheme is ending, so there's very good reason for these new grants worth around £500 million to replace the COVID-19 local support grants, which end tomorrow. These details have been revealed tonight by Bloomberg. Now, all of that comes after this speech by Keir Starmer, which really did delight senior Labour figures who felt rather in the cold in recent years under the Jeremy Corbyn era. I spoke to one veteran of the Kinnock and the Blair years. They said this speech today by Keir Starmer was of historic significance. They think it is up there, the combination of the reforms this week on party management and that speech, up there with what Neil Kinnock was doing in the 1980s. And this person said, the left nearly killed our party and Keir Starmer has saved it. But then this person did say that Labour still has a mountain to climb and they've really got to up their game across the piece in Parliament.
And interestingly, we heard Keir talk about what Labour's approach to Brexit or the Brexit deal needed to be today.
Well, this is, of course, a subject that dare not speak its name under Keir Starmer. He's barely spoken about it because, of course, he knows the perception was that before the general election, when he was the shadow Brexit secretary campaigning for another referendum, perception was that he was trying to overturn Brexit. Of course, the electorate voted for, wait for it, get Brexit done. So he felt badly burned. But today what he did was he took Boris Johnson's slogan and adapted it, changed it. He thinks to his advantage, and Keir Starmer was saying that he would make Brexit work. And that is basically saying two things. I am not about overturning Brexit, but secondly, I am about making a better fist of it.
Nick, thanks very much indeed. Well, joining us now, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Lisa Nandy, originally stood against Keir Starmer for the leadership. Lisa Nandy, is Brexit working?
I don't think the problem is that we have left the European Union. I was someone who campaigned to remain. The problem is that we left with a paper-thin deal that is causing havoc for a lot of our businesses and is starting to have an impact on consumers as well. With 2 years later, after the Prime Minister promised to get Brexit done, we're still locked in this needlessly antagonistic relationship with the European Union. We still haven't got the agreements that we need to safeguard the Good Friday Agreement. I think people are sick and tired of that, and that's why Keir made it a feature of his speech today.
Can you spell it out for us? Sorry to interrupt. What does it mean then to make Brexit work? Will you spell out what you will be doing, what needs to change, or what you would renegotiate as of now?
Well, we don't want to renegotiate. We want to build on what has been agreed. Very little has been agreed because our government took a great deal of it off the table. But first of all, we would seek a veterinary agreement with the European Union that would help to cut down some of the red tape that is causing real problems on the island of Ireland and help to uphold the Good Friday Agreement, which is an article of faith for us.
Sorry, when you say help to uphold the Northern Ireland Agreement, in terms of the protocol, which we've now seen extended 3 times, would you be saying get rid of it, or would you be saying we just need to do it better and carry on asking people to do the red tape checks that are within it? What would you say?
I mean, as ever with this government, of course, you wouldn't want to start from here. But I think with a bit of creativity and goodwill, we could make the protocol work. The person who's doing most to undermine it at the moment is the Prime Minister who negotiated it. And I spoke to EU partners at the Labour Party conference this week. They go to all of the political party conferences. There is that goodwill on the other side, and we now need a Prime Minister who's going to take that seriously.
Except, to be fair, creativity and goodwill doesn't really help you get to what rules or what things you'll change. For example, free movement. You've now ruled that out, I think. It was in Keir Starmer's 10-point plan, defend freedom of movement as we leave the EU. You're no longer trying to defend freedom of movement, is that right?
There's no appetite at all on either side to negotiate freedom of movement. What we're looking at is a bespoke deal that would include a veterinary agreement in our view. That would be an enormously helpful step forward.
And would that be dynamic alignment?
Save that. You say creativity and goodwill won't solve that, but creativity and goodwill is how you get to agreements like a veterinary agreement. Yeah. We would like to see further alignment with the EU because in the end, it's in the interests of British workers and British people. If we uphold those environmental standards, if we uphold those workplace standards that we fought for across the European Union for a long time, that would be in the interests of Britain. We start from the perspective that we've got to negotiate a way forward that ends the antagonism and upholds the interests of the British people.
Okay.
And that's
so
why I said
no free movement.
A deeper and stronger relationship, especially on foreign policy and security, where there is no agreement in place at all at the moment.
I'm going to come on to that in a second. Just in terms of where we are now, this crisis, emergency visas, which industry would you be offering emergency visas for? I mean, would you literally go through and say, we need, 5,000 in the care sector, in hospitality, in butchers, in construction? How many would you be handing out, and how many sectors would that include?
Well, look, what this country needs is a plan. And what we're seeing at the moment is the consequence of not having a plan. We supported the temporary measure of extending visas for HGV drivers, but that's no substitute for actually increasing our own homegrown supply. And in areas like the care sector, that means not just skilling people up in order to work in our care homes, one of the most important jobs you can do, but also treating people properly at work, which will help with recruitment and retention. That's why, there was an argument at a Labour conference about what rate we should set the minimum wage at.
Yeah.
But all of us are strongly in favour of increasing the minimum wage in order to ensure that the people who got us through this pandemic are treated and rewarded fairly.
Just on that point, you're not in favour of the £15, right?
Look, I want people to be paid properly, but I also want them to have somewhere to work. And that means we need a credible and realistic plan that we can actually deliver. That, to me, was the big difference between what you saw on the platform today from Keir Starmer and what we've seen from Boris Johnson. I often listen to Boris Johnson's slogans, and I like the sound of them. I like the idea of levelling up. I like the idea of global Britain. But when you dig beneath the reality, there is absolutely nothing there. There's just chaos in the country, people queuing at petrol stations. And what Keir did this week by standing up for a £10 minimum wage, but against a plan that currently nobody can articulate can be delivered, is set Labour back on the road to power by saying to people, you can trust us again. If we make a promise,
Lisa
we'll
Nandy,
keep it.
We're out of time, but thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
The Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, has confirmed the government's reserve tanker fleet is now on the road delivering fuel. He's also warned that the petrol crisis could affect deliveries in many sectors in the lead up to Christmas. So tonight we ask what the knock-on effect of worker shortages will be and how many other industries and businesses could be hit in the crucial coming months. Here's Ben Chew.
What was here previously was a former public house, and what should be here now is 16 houses under construction. But as you can see, we've made a start, but very little else is happening.
I have spent the best part of £10,000 in the last 3 months on local radio station advertising, various job boards, Facebook, you name it, we've tried it. And out of all of that money, I have 2 successful applicants.
Welcome to the labour shortage economy. Disruption to fuel deliveries due to a dearth of tanker drivers is not a one-off. It's not a bit of bad luck. At root, it's a consequence of something fundamental being missing from this country: available workers. So after hauliers and fuel, where is the next headline-dominating crisis going to come from? Well, maybe we should think about something like the care sector, where in England last year, 1 in 20 of the workforce were EU-born. That's around 84,000 people. Many of them seem to have left, and now the sector is struggling to fill many tens of thousands of vacancies. These care workers in Herne Bay say they're overworked because of the shortage of staff.
This week I'm doing 4 15-hour shifts.
We're all having to pick up overtime because people need their care and we can't, so because this is a small company, we're all having to do extra work, so we're not getting days off.
What happens if the care sector doesn't get the staff it needs?
Unfortunately, people will either end up in hospital, in nursing homes, or with no care whatsoever. They will suffer, their families will suffer because they won't get the help. It's already a very emotional environment and there is no outside help for them.
Another potential flashpoint for the next crisis is construction. 20% of the construction workforce were EU-born in 2019. That year, there were 176,000 of them in the building sector. By last year, that had fallen to just 127,000. If builders can't hire labourers, this Nottingham construction boss has a warning.
The government's obviously set some really strong housing targets. They will just not be achievable if we're unable to be able to bring this new pool of talent through into this industry. In terms of the price of housing, I think we're going to get to a point where some of those costs just won't be able to be passed on to the consumer. There's only so far that anyone can afford to pay for a property these days.
Why aren't the workers there? The post-lockdown opening up of many Western economies has created supply bottlenecks almost everywhere. Most of that should be temporary. Yet for the UK, a good deal of the problem looks like it might be permanent. The UK has seen an exodus of EU migrant labour due to a combination of Brexit and the pandemic lockdowns. Businesses are lobbying for a relaxation of the post-Brexit immigration regime. And after the U-turn last week by ministers on EU hauliers visas, they may yet succeed. But what if the new labour shortage economy is here to stay? What does that mean for the way we work, for the prices of the things we buy, for the very way we live?
When you start to get a tighter labour market, and I think
the former head of the government's independent Migration Advisory Committee says the impact of our labour shortage economy will be double-edged.
There will be winners and losers from it. But overall, I think it should be sort of positive for the average level of wages and productivity in the economy. But if you are a consumer of the products produced in one of the sectors that now feels more pressure, but don't work there, you'll probably be paying slightly higher prices. On the other hand, if you're a worker in one of those sectors, you may find you're slightly better paid. We are facing serious short-run disruptions at the moment, and we've got to get through them. There's no reason why we can't build a prosperous economy.
So yes, we can build back and better, as the slogan goes. But for many on the ground at the moment in our labour shortage economy, it doesn't feel like it.
Ben Chew, well, the government has made attempts to get fuel delivered by the army to get the roads running again, but the shortage of drivers will hit businesses more widely. Across Europe and even America, COVID has left many sectors scrabbling to fill jobs. But here, the end of freedom of movement brought by the Brexit deal has meant that across the board, in care work, in hospitality, delivery and food production, the shortages are now felt more acutely. We're going to talk to Minette Batters, head of the National Farmers Union. What do you think the knock-on effect will be on farmers and on farms, Minette?
The situation is exceptionally serious right now. And if we look at the main level of requirement, we're seeing 43% vacancies in the processing sector. That is sort of butcheries, where there is a massive shortfall. And following that through 35% shortfall on workforce, that's seasonal workers, farm workers, and then 11% actually on drivers. So it's why the whole industry, from the NFU, the British Retail Consortium, through to the Haulage Association and many others, the British meat processors, have all come together and said we need an emergency scheme, a COVID visa scheme, in order to keep the show effectively on the road to get through this short-term period. We don't believe this will last forever. It can be resolved, but it absolutely needs government to work with the industry to resolve it, and urgently.
Just explain that. If you take your percentages and turn those into what it means in terms of what we can expect at Christmas or on the shelves, what will that look like?
Well, there are two priorities for me. One is farmer and animal welfare is absolutely paramount, and keeping the shelves fully stocked so that nobody faces food shortages. And we can resolve this quite easily, but there is a shortfall of butchers that can come here. And we need this whole scheme put in place. We've got a really crisis situation building in the pig sector at the moment, whereby pigs are not coming through onto the marketplace. They're being held back on farm. This is going to create an animal welfare crisis if it is not resolved, and we have to resolve it. It's gratefully received from the poultry sector that there is that visa scheme in place now, as there is for the hauliers. But you've got to look at this as a whole chain approach. You cannot treat one fish in isolation.
So when you say you're talking about pigs, how many pigs would you imagine would have to be destroyed then if this doesn't get solved? What are we looking at?
Well, we'd be looking at a welfare cull potentially of 150,000 pigs. This cannot happen. It is potentially a week, 10 days away, and it has to be resolved. I've been trying to engage. I've actually been trying to get a meeting with the Home Secretary for 2 years now, which has failed to happen, as it has with the Immigration Minister, Kevin Foster, as well. So I would like an urgent meeting with them. This can be resolved. It must be resolved. I do not feel anybody can preside over a welfare cull of healthy livestock. I don't believe it has happened in the world before, and it cannot happen now. But this is extraordinary times with the global pandemic and the after effects of Brexit, the run up to Christmas. We have to act, and we have to work collectively with government.
But when you hear, for example, Alan Manning from Migration Advisory Committee saying, yes, it will be painful, but the alternative is going back to supplying cheap labour. Can't we just pay British workers more?
It is absolutely ridiculous to say that. We are a high-wage economy. I'm proud of it. You've got many examples of seasonal workers being paid £15 an hour. We have adopted the national living wage here. People are being paid above the national living wage. We have been the most preferred destination in Europe to work in, and we are the highest wage category in the food sector. And I would add, we are the most affordable food in Europe. So that is a phenomenal winning deal. This idea that it is a low-paid sector, it is a highly regulated sector, the national living wage has been, I would say, a great success story. And we have the most affordable food. So this needs short-term emergency action, and now.
Minette Batters, thank you very much. Thank you. Now, life at 50 degrees. We return to the places on the planet where global warming is creating the experience of a 50-degree temperature. The number of these extremely hot days every year has doubled since 1980. 40 years ago, it was only really seen in the hottest deserts on Earth, but it's now appearing with terrifying regularity in more populated areas. As traditional ways of life have become increasingly difficult, BBC News Arabic has been documenting the struggle of communities against the rising heat, both in the developed and the developing world. Tonight, we're just across the US border into Mexico, where the water from the Colorado River used to keep communities alive. So what happens when that water dries up or is used up by their wealthy northern neighbours?
Los Cucapá, mi tribu. Bueno, los Cucapá somos nombrados la gente del río, somos gente de agua, habitantes del delta del río Colorado. Pues es el río sagrado de nosotros porque los Cucapá desde tiempos ancestrales han pescado en la parte del río. Estados Unidos nos quitó el agua y si no hay agua del Colorado, pues también nos afecta en todo, porque la gente se va, perdemos la cultura. Mi mamá también, Inocencia, pues ella ha hablado mucho acerca de que pues nos devuelvan el río que nos robaron, porque ella es la autoridad tradicional.
Pues cuando se secó el río Colorado, pues ya casi lloraban todos y se acabó el pescado.
¿Pero tú quieres que llegue el agua al río, ma?
Pues sí, desde cuando estoy hable y hable, por eso ya me enfado y ya no quiero hablar.
Seguridad pública indicando que hay una persona tirada en la vía pública, probablemente por un agotamiento de calor. Lo que sí, pues sí está un poquito más rápido el calor este año, que nos vino un poquito más rápido de lo que es, pero esta vez nos llegó a los centígrados muy altos. Oye, ¿cómo estás? Hey. Pupilas y...
Son compras de 3 operaciones. Abre los ojos, Karen. Abre los ojos. ¿Cómo te llamas? ¿Tenías mucho calor, Lucina? Ok, vamos a hacerlo. Tranquilo.
Mira cómo lo alivianó el agua, lo refresco. El alcohólico y ellos son los que son más propensos a tener ese tipo de incidentes. Ya le ¿no? Vete a descansar.
Vete a descansar, vete a la sombra, toma agua.
Tanto seguridad pública como nosotros no hubiéramos llegado, esa persona probablemente haya fallecido.
Se pueden lograr las cosas entre ambos países y no es necesario más que la motivación. Antonia, trajimos este mapa del delta. Estamos llevando a cabo actividades de restauración. El plan en el futuro es en algún momento ver agua fluyendo otra vez.
Pues que quisiera que fuera verdad, ¿verdad? Y que todo esto que estamos hablando ahora, ¿verdad? Pues sí. Mi madre ha añorado tanto, está enferma. Ha añorado tanto que vuelva a revivir el río y no. Creo que sería la mejor satisfacción de mi madre ver el agua fluir de nuevo. Parece algo imposible, pero es que después el río, después de estar muerto, toma vida de nuevo.
Qué lindo es tu río. Qué lindo es tu río. Si te pone pantalón.
Está muy bonito. Luego trae muchas islas, porque se llenan los pescadores, digo yo.
¿Pero a quién vas a agradecer? ¿A todas las organizaciones?
A todos, con los gringos que la pelean también.
Life at 50 degrees in Mexico. Now, it wouldn't be a proper Newsnight end of conference if we didn't end with a political panel who've been chewing the cud on that speech and wondering where it takes us all more broadly. So joining us now is the political editor of the New Statesman, Stephen Bush, Tribune staff writer Grace Blakely and the Centre for Policy Studies Robert Colville, who co-authored the Tories' 2019 election manifesto. Welcome to you all. And Robert, actually, I'm going to start with you, because if you were doing the same this time round, or maybe you are, would this give you food for thought? Will the government be spooked by any of this? Will it attract Tory voters?
Well, I think I mean, it's certainly it's obviously more of a direct threat than Corbyn. It's a reality. This is a reality-based Labour leader and a reality-based Labour Party. And in fact, it's fascinating that the water between the two parties, the issues they're fighting on, has narrowed significantly. Starmer's one of his key pledges was to increase R&D spending to 3% of GDP. The Tories have already increased GDP spending to 2.4% of GDP. NHS, social care, education catch-up, and net zero. These are not issues that the Tory party is not engaged with. That said, I don't think the Tories are making their decisions based on Labour and Keir Starmer. I think they're making their decisions based on how they want to govern. In fact, even throughout Starmer's leadership, and as this kind of speech shows, and this weekend shows, Labour's problem is not that Keir Starmer doesn't look like a prime minister. Labour's problem is the Labour Party.
Grace, if this speech is attracting Conservative voters, is that music to your ears?
Look, I think the problem here is that we are living through currently a gut-wrenching economic crisis that came on the back of another crisis that led to, after that, a decade of stagnation. If you're someone in my generation, you've lived through two massive crises, and you've seen the political class basically completely fail to respond to that. And whilst there were some good messages in this speech, particularly around kind of the Green New Deal and some investment that would perhaps go some way to tackling those issues, it was missing a huge amount of substance. And I just don't think it spoke to many of the issues that people out there living through this pandemic on low wages, struggling to get by, are really going to respond to. KEIR really needs to be reaching out and showing that he's going to be able to tackle those massive, massive challenges that our country is facing.
Can I just ask you about that? Do you really think it was missing substance? Because it was really long, and he did talk about a lot of things. I'm surprised to hear you say it was lacking substance.
I think it was a real achievement to manage to speak for such a length of time without really putting that much meat on the bones of any policy. Think of other things that weren't mentioned. Inequality wasn't mentioned. Nothing really on taxation. No real mention of kind of changing ownership structures. Sure, there was a bit on the Green New Deal. Nothing on social housing. That is a massive, massive issue to many, many Labour voters. And Conference passed the policy suggesting there needed to be a big programme of social house building.
Stephen, did you notice the things that weren't in it?
No, I mean, candidly, I think there's this slightly strange thing, and parts of the Labour Party are very invested in this idea, and Keir Starmer doesn't announce enough policy, when, if anything, one of the problems we still have is that they haven't been very good at setting out their clear set of principles about what they're for or against. But actually, in terms of individual shopping list policies, if anything, the biggest problem with this speech is had far too many individual shopping list policies.
Did you think it worked?
Well, I suppose, candidly, before going on air here, I watched the 10 o'clock news, and they absolutely got all of the headlines that they think they need. You know, Labour is changing, Keir Starmer is, a tough prime ministerial looking for him. So it's clearly mission accomplished in terms of what his team think they need to do to win the next election.
It was quite interesting, Robert, to look at the way that the Johnson government got to power by cutting off the moderate wing over Brexit, the Rory Stewarts and the David Gauks and all the rest of it on the outside. I mean, is that going to work for Starmer if he cuts off the people that he's had the row with? Maybe, the sort of the people that Grace is speaking of there.
Well, I mean, I think there's that line, isn't there? All the wrong people are cheering. I think Starmer's team, as Stephen said, will definitely feel that all the right people are booing. Like, if Grace is unhappy with Starmer's speech, that means it's probably a good speech, and it probably did its political job, because a Labour Party that speaks to Grace and her kind of her faction of the party is not one which speaks to the mainstream voters.
Right.
But that's
so let's just bear in mind here that we
Starmer has is that.
Let me bring in Grace to respond to that.
Yeah, so I mean, we've seen polling recently where 69% of people said that they think the economy is rigged against working people. We've seen 74% of people say that they think more assets should be taken into public ownership. There was a poll done a while ago that said, a vanishingly small amount of people, less than 5%, thought that the economy didn't need radical transformation. Those are the people that Labour needs to be speaking to.
Except I think they lost with that last time round, Grace.
Can I just finish this point very quickly? I think what's quite striking is that Keir Starmer's doing appallingly in the polls. He has been for quite some time. Because there's this sense that he's kind of one of us. He's been treated relatively well by the media, and there just isn't really any, analysis as to how he's actually going to deal with any of these challenges that the country is facing. But when people are looking at this and seeing a leader that isn't really speaking to the fact that they're going through one of the biggest crises.
Let me just bring in Stephen. So he definitely was putting the Corbyn era behind him. He was definitely trying to put the worst election result, since 1935 behind him. The question is, we always come at that analogy of the aeroplane and the two wings. Does he need the Blakely? Can I call it the Blakely wing? Does he need that wing to fly?
Thank you.
Well, that's actually the interesting difference between Labour's opposition period in the 2010s and Labour's opposition period in the 1980s, right? Bennism, whatever one thinks of it intellectually, was not politically popular in the country, right? Corbynism was not politically popular enough in the country to form a majority, but it did undoubtedly bring in new voters to the Labour Party, right? It does have a real and serious electoral constituency. So part of the challenge for any Labour leader, and part of the challenge for Keir Starmer, is to find a way to sort of hold on to most of the voters who were attracted to that, and to win over a bunch of new voters. Yeah, but that is the difficulty. So he does need both wings to fly in a way that actually Labour politicians in the 90s and 80s did not need both wings of the plane to fly.
Robert, I guess, when you're sort of looking back, if this was, if Corbyn was the Bennite, is Keir, as it were, the Kinnock, or is he the Blair? Has he leapfrogged, or is he the sort of the man that gets you to the next bit of Labour? Or do they go back to Corbyn?
So I think, well, I mean, the rule changes this week make it a lot harder to go back to Corbyn. I think there's always a tendency for us, because we're political geeks who watched the entire 90 minutes of this incredibly long and in many places incredibly boring speech, I should just flag, to over-index on the fact that this is going to really shift the narrative. The fact is, Labour's issues are probably still kind of the same that they were. If you think that Starmer's an okay guy, but Labour Party is the problem, then you still think that. Especially when you see people heckling him in the speech when he's talking about, people caring for his dying mother, which was just a horrible moment. If you think that, Starmer's a sort of competent administrator, but he's not very good at politics, then nothing that's really happened has changed that. He lost his bid on the rules. There was like 10 minutes on robot doctors in the speech, which could definitely have been cut. And also, like he gave a 7,000-word speech now, and he published a 12,000-word essay, and like there's no overlap between the two.
Do you think, Stephen, he's found the language to take on Boris Johnson?
No, I think Rob is right, and there is still a problem, and that Keir Starmer lacks a theme. I think where he did feel like he'd hit something was he was starting to lean into the fact that actually he is, to put it in as nice a way as possible, he's sort of the dependable bloke who the woman ends up with at the end of the rom-com, and Boris is the person he starts out with in the middle of the rom-com.
Let me just go lastly to Grace. Do you want him to win? Can you support him to win?
Of course I want him to win. Everyone who is a member of the Labour Party is a member of the Labour Party because they are very invested in wanting to build a just, fair, sustainable, democratic society, really wanting to kind of answer that challenge of taking back control, of actually giving back control and power in this country to ordinary people rather than the kind of, political elite and the corporations to whom they respond. So, yes, I would like to see Labour in power, partly because conference passed so many good policies that actually pushed KEIR on things like the Green New Deal, and that power is really, really important. But he has this conference made that harder to achieve.
We're out of time, but thank you all very much indeed. That is all from us for tonight. Back tomorrow. See you then. Bye-bye.